So sorry for the late start. My name's Bob Webster. I'm not a JUC, as it mentions there. JUC did the presentation in Washington for the Cloudbees conference. I work in the same group as a JUC. I work for the vCloud Air division. I'm in the technical marketing group. And today's session, we're going to cover really two things. I'm going to give you a very quick overview of vCloud Air. And then we're going to talk about how you can do DevOps using open source tools and tools of your choice. Nice, on vCloud Air. They really don't like you to stay on the internet very long. Okay, see when that comes up again. And then at the end, we'll have a quick demo and show you a new integration that we have with Cloudbees Enterprise. And we'll show you the capabilities. It isn't in the catalog yet, and we weren't able to announce it yet because it's not in the catalog. But as soon as it is in there, in the next few weeks, we'll put out a formal press release. But you'll be the first to see it here today. So first, what is vCloud Air? How many people here have heard of vCloud Air? Okay, it's getting better. Better with every conference. It's a constant challenge for us to get the word out about vCloud Air. So what is it? It's a public cloud that uses vSphere technology. So what that means is all the workloads you have on premise, you can move them to a public cloud and pay metered usage against those. That's one of the options for billing, and without any change. And that ultimately you can use the same tools, monitoring tools, networking tools, the same infrastructure you use on premise, you can use in the cloud. So you hear a lot of talk these days about hybrid cloud. This is true hybrid cloud. It's the exact same infrastructure in both places. You can move workloads back and forth without modification. And you can use the same management tools. So that gives you really three things. It gives you flexibility, any app. So of the 90 operating systems that we support on ESX, you can use those exact same workloads in the cloud. It gives you the freedom to move workloads back and forth. You can move them through a secure VPN. You can move them through different communication channels. It'll give you different performance. And it gives you the ability to build new apps. So today we're going to talk mostly about DevOps and how people that are doing DevOps and build test on premise can move those workloads to the cloud and then bring those exact same builds back on premise. So it gives you the flexibility and freedom to do either one. So what's an example of this? Uploading a virtual machine, as we mentioned, 100% compatible. So you can take an OVF file that's off. We don't yet support live migration, but take an OVF that's off and move it up to the cloud and start it. That's the only task at hand. No configuration changes. When you configure new VMs on vCloud Air, you have a choice. We don't do t-shirt sizes, so you can set CPU, memory, and storage to any variables you want. We'll give you some guidelines to try and keep the ratios consistent or practical, but you can dial up whatever you want in terms of capacity and performance. The vCloud connector, which a lot of you might be familiar with, is the main tool that we use to connect between on-premise and the cloud. It allows us to move the workloads back and forth. And it also does something called automated catalog synchronization, which is pretty key. So if you have an on-premise catalog filled with VM images that your enterprise mandates, those same images will be replicated into the cloud and can be provisioned from the cloud. So it gives you the oversight and governance that you had on-premise in the cloud environment. The other thing you get with vCloud Air that you don't see with a lot of our competitors is you get a full gateway where you can configure advanced security. So starting with networks, you can have up to 9 networks associated with your, what we call a virtual data center, in turn including one which is bridged to the outside, so you can have internet access for any of your VMs. And the gateway provides a number of services. So it provides routing and bridging, firewall that you control, NAT that you control. So you can set up DNAT and SNAT rules for all of your internal networks and external points. It has a load balancer with health monitoring, so you can build out pools of servers and do load balancing. It has IPsec VPN, so if you want to run a secure channel between your premise and the gateway, you can do that from router to router. And it has a DHCP pool that allows you to take a subset of nodes and boot those using getting their IP from DHCP. The other thing you can do on our cloud is you can bring your own third-party appliances. So if you're using F5 or Cisco or Riverbed type load balancers, you can bring those products as is and run them in the cloud. So it's very easy to replicate virtual infrastructure you have on-premise in the cloud. Just a little on the pricing side, we offer really two different models. So there's the on-demand model that everyone's familiar with, where you can swipe a credit card and then you get billed by the minute. We break things down for you between compute storage and memory utilization. But a lot of our customers also like a subscription option. And the best idea there would be a fixed amount of capacity. So the concept is a phone bill when you have a cellular phone. You've got a fixed amount you pay for a fixed amount of capacity. If you use it, that's great. If you don't, you lose it. And at the end of the, here we go, at the end of the time period, it resets and you can use it for the next period. What that gives customers, though, is a predictable budgeted amount. So they can pay by purchase order and have a deterministic amount that they're going to spend each month, instead of maybe runaway type expenses that you see with other billing models. These are the data centers we have. They're expanding all the time. So we've got two types of data centers. There are data centers that are for general purpose, and then some that are certified for government workloads that have additional government certifications. We've added Japan and Germany recently, so customers that want to keep workloads and data in country, they can do that very nicely. And these are tier 3 or above type data centers. When you log into vCloud Air, you can decide where you want to place your workloads by selecting a geographic location. So the approach overall across all the products is really 3 pillars: open choice, and you'll see that with our DevOps offering. We're not going to give you proprietary tools and tell you should use them. We have some excellent VMware tools that you're going to see today around continuous delivery, but you also can use any open source tools you want. So given our long history of working with the partner channel, we encourage our partners to come on board and run their software on vCloud Air. And we try not to cannibalize by introducing our own products that displace them. Integrated, we make strategic investments and try and integrate things together. So you'll see in this session that there's certain open source products we're doing pre-integration on and then offering those as a service that'll accelerate and give you a little more value out of those, accelerate your adoption and give you a little more value out of those products together. And then last is hybrid. We make sure that we have that option to move things back and forth and give you the flexibility. The notion is you've got an extended data center in every way, from a networking, from a storage and compute, and from a monitoring perspective, it's one data center. So everything we're doing, make sure we don't break that value prop. Okay, so that's the quick overview on vCloud Air, and now we'll talk about DevOps. Any questions on vCloud Air before I move in? Okay. All right, so DevOps now. CI/CD on-premise, there's a lot of customers that are doing this today, and what they're asking us is how can we take our workloads and move them to the cloud, either from a bursting capacity perspective or just we'd like to have the agility of just not having to acquire new infrastructure for new projects. We'd like to use a cloud-based infrastructure. So the first thing you get is that VPN connection to the gateway, so that gives you an extended data center. Down at the bottom, we're showing that the catalogs get synchronized, so all the VMs that you have on-premise or all your templates on-premise are now available in the cloud. And then you can start to use open source tools that are certified for vCloud Air. So you can use Chef, you can use Puppet, Ansible. There's a whole list that you'll see in a minute of vendors that we're working with, and Cloudbees and Git to just take whatever you're doing on-premise and move it up. You can synchronize the binary assets and templates. So if you're using something like Artifactory, JFrog Artifactory, you can use binary repository synchronization to move assets as well as templates. And then the last thing worth noting is that you can really start and parallelize testing. We've seen some customers doing this where they want to be able to run functional tests at the same time as load tests, with the idea that I just want to get all these tests done as quickly as possible. If something fails, then I'm going to invalidate the build and move on. But I don't want to have this serial process where I'm spending hours and hours end to end. So I can do a lot of parallelization, just pay for the loads as I bring them up and run the tests, and then take the VMs down again. So the main premise is you can do CI and CD with whatever tools you want to use. Open source tools, VMware tools, and you can bind them all together with vRealize code stream. So this is a VMware product we're going to talk about in a second that'll take and give you an end-to-end CD process for all of these disparate tools. So back to those 3 value props, why is it hybrid, open, and consistent? So it gives you the ability to move things on-premise on the cloud. You can use all the open source and VMware and third-party tools. You can basically do DevOps your way. You can decide what you want to do on-premise and use those same tools in the cloud. So what's our roadmap look like? The Cloudbees Enterprise, we were hoping to announce that at this show. We missed it by a tiny bit. We're going to show it to you today. But that's the ability to use both vSphere and vCloud Air VMs as slaves, as well as borrow VMs in vCloud Air as part of your build process. So if you want to do some type of, during your build, if you want to do some type of localized test or something that dirties a file system, you can borrow a VM, run your whole test, and then revert the snapshot back and put that VM back into the pool. So it gives you a great way to have a consistent state without having to instantiate a server every single time you do a deploy. The second thing is Chef. We've been working with Chef. There's a knife plugin that's available. It's been available for a while now. That'll allow you to create VMs on vCloud Air as well as do other operations against them. There's Test Kitchen integration, and we're working on further integrations with them at present. I'll just jump over to the far right. We just released Bitnami as a partner. So if you go to Bitnami, you can now target their hundreds of open products stacks onto vCloud Air as a valid target. On the left, Tosca. We're very committed to the Tosca blueprinting standard, and we've got a new service that's coming out that'll allow you to define applications as a Tosca blueprint. So these would be multi-layer applications that could be either 100% in the cloud or on-premise or a combination of both, and define that in a standards-based way that doesn't lock you into a definition. So if you happen to change cloud providers, you've got a totally cloud-agnostic definition. And we'll have a service later this year that allows you to upload blueprints that you've defined and run those deployments as a service. And finally, in the center, vRealize Code Stream is a VMware technology, which is a CD technology, allows you to define stages and pipelines, and then the gates in between those. And that product is bundled with JFrog Artifactory as a binary artifact repository, and it also uses vRealize automation. So if you have a large number of blueprints or automations that you've built for vSphere, you can leverage those with the same tool set. So just a quick deep dive on what CodeStream looks like. So as I mentioned, it's got Artifactory built in and VRA built in. And then it also will support any of the tools at the bottom. So you'll see Puppet, Chef. If you have configuration management or provisioning scripts, you can incorporate those into the CD pipeline. It allows you to define stages and gating rules in between. And the gating rules could be manual approval or automated approval or hook into other types of approval systems. It provides visibility across the pipeline. So it's a fully visual model of the build pipeline. You can see where artifacts are, and you can enforce governance across each stage. So this is showing you, it's a little hard to see. You can see development, UAT, it's hard for me to see, stage and production. And then these little icons in the center are the gating rules that are defined. So we've passed the first 2 gates. I'm in staging, waiting for a release to production. So I've got end-to-end visibility. I've got artifacts and its version in each stage. Stages for every release. Status of every stage, and I can compare stages and get deployment details. So I can define, obviously, as many of these as I want for each of my projects. And as I mentioned, it really also will leverage all the other scripts you have, so you're not throwing any of the way. If you've got Puppet or Chef scripts, and you're using those to manage configuration and stop configuration drift, you can use the same tools here. And you can also use it for a multi-cloud deployment. So if you're running some of it on-premise, some of it on vCloud Air or on other cloud platforms, it supports all of them. Just a quick slide on Tosca. So right now we're working with a partner, Cloudify, and we have a working version of this, where you can define a blueprint, a YAML definition, which you can then see visually. You can, using the Cloudify product, you can do a deployment, so it'll go out and create the VMs, it'll create whatever configuration you need, push your containers or whatever application deployment model you have, and manage all that as a atomic unit. How many people have heard of Tosca before? Nobody. Okay. Yeah, it's a pretty new idea, and there's, like most things, there's different competing specifications. We're behind this one because it is the Oasis based standard, and there's quite a few. There's some good IBM and some other partners are on board now with the same standard. So then the last thing I wanted to talk about before we get to the demo is continuous integration as a service. So I mentioned that in the integration side, we work with partners and try and do custom integration that bring more value. So we've got this type of scenario where I'm using Jenkins, Artifactory, some type of build subsystem, source code control, and I want to use this for a project team. So rather than go out and trying to provision all these VMs, what I can do with this new service is go out and pick them one at a time through a wizard. So I can select the continuous integration engine. Right now, Jenkins is the only choice. Maybe it is anyways. There's a binary repository selector, and then configuration management, where you currently can pick Chef and Puppet, but we're adding Ansible and Salt Stack. Boy. If anybody knows how to make this stop, feel free to speak up. Yeah, that's a good idea. Do that next, we can finish before it comes up again. Okay, so you can pick the different tool sets, and then you can select the amount of CPU you want, the amount of memory, and the amount of storage. So it's consistent to the idea that no t-shirt sizes. You can dial exactly what you want to use and pay for that capacity. If you go over to vCloud Air, you can see during the deployment that it'll go out and create each of those VMs to your specifications. And then it'll install the products, and it'll do single sign-on between each of them, do all of your SSL hookup. So in terms of Chef server and clients and identity for Chef in Jenkins, all those things get set up for you. You can have an individual control in the dashboard that lets you start and stop each of the instances in the environment. Oh, and there's also a health check. It doesn't show it on, I thought I had another slide, but there's a state that allows you to see each of them in performance and give you a health status so you can see how they're doing. So this is something we'll be releasing in the next few weeks, and as we go forward, we'll add more and more open source tools to it. So the idea is for organizations that are new to CI, trying to get a team provisioned and running very quickly, IT or development staff can go in and get this environment up in a couple of minutes. Okay, the next thing I wanted to talk about was build and test on vCloud Air with our new capability with Cloudbees. And there's really a couple scenarios that we support. So first, you may already know that Jenkins has a plugin for vSphere. So I have the ability today to take a pool of VMs on vSphere and use those as slaves. So whenever I do builds, I can dish out the builds to the individual slaves. This new capability allows you to do the same thing on vCloud Air. So you can take a pool of resources on vCloud Air and designate those as being different types of VMs and different types of pools. So I could have a pool for Windows servers and a pool for Linux servers. I can take all those and give them to Jenkins and say, use these on different bases. So one basis might be use the on-cloud resources as much as possible, or I might say use it for designated builds. So I can, in that way, decide that certain builds will burst out to the cloud to be done, and certain builds will stay on-premise. So we can do something very much like this. When we install both plugins, we can have a local pool of servers as well as a vSphere, our vCloud Air pool of servers. And we're going to do a demo of this next. So any questions before we get to the demo? I want to leave lots of time for you to see the capability. No questions? All right. Let me shut off my Wi-Fi. It's an excellent suggestion. Although, Okay, so this is a live site that Jenkins has up, or Cloudbees has up to demonstrate this capability. Made a quick recording to show you. Because of the demo gods, I didn't want to try and do it live. You can see Wi-Fi might be a problem, but this is out there, and you can get to the site and look at it. You won't be able to kick off any jobs without credentials, but you can go out and see all the different configurations that are there. So first thing I wanted to point out is that the way this is set up is there's a whole series of jobs that are all scheduled to build every 15 minutes. And the idea there is just to drive a certain amount of demand. On the left, you see there's pooled virtual servers and vCloud virtual servers. So at the moment, what I have configured is, or this demo has configured is the vCloud virtual machines. You see this all right? It's kind of blurry, or yeah, very blurry. So down at the bottom, these are individual VMs that are on vCloud Air. So depending on the cadence of these builds happening every few minutes, it'll end up driving different load. So the demo's dynamic. If you go look at this, you'll see it's changing frequently depending on just the cadence of how the builds line up. The way that is set up is in the individual jobs. Let's just take a quick look at that. Because this isn't a normal configuration that you would do. I don't think anybody does timed builds rather than trigger builds. But down here, you can put like a cron type definition and say, just schedule this. So every 15 minutes, every one of these builds is triggering and running. So there's two places you put the configuration. The first place is on the vCloud Air. You can set up individual pools. So if I go into configure at the top, I can define my vCloud Air credentials. So that's my login URL and password. And then I can define any number of pools. And I can do some interesting things with the pools. Because I'm paying as I go, I may not want to just leave them running. So I can specify here that when a build gets designated out to this, I want to start this VM, run the build, and shut it down again. And you'll see later that I have options to say start the build, run the build, revert the snapshot so it's back to a consistent state, and then return it to a pool. So it's key because I don't want to pay for capacity that isn't in use. I don't want to have all these build servers sitting out there. And you'll see during this recording, and if you go out to the site, on that left-hand side, you'll see servers come and go, depending on the load. So I can set up individual pools. I talk to those pools. The way we detect when they come up is using SSH. So when the SSH daemon comes up, then we determine that it's available, and then we know we can push the build to it. So otherwise, there's a chance we might try and use it before it's ready. So here I've got different types of pools set up. So I can do my different types of Windows slaves or Linux slaves. And I can have different specifications on whether I want to power them off, power them on, what I want to do when I start and what I want to do when I stop. So that gives me a base configuration of cloud resources. So if we go look at vCloud Air, we log into our virtual data center, which is our construct where you'd have all your organizational users and VMs. I can look at a subset of the VMs that are designated to the pool. And again, I can dial these up. When I configure these, I can decide how many CPUs, memory, and storage they each have. And I can drill in and take a look at specific details for each of them. So back here, if I take a look at the second layer of configuration within Jenkins itself, if I go into Manage Jenkins, I can specify how I want to use those pools that I've set up. And there's primarily a couple different triggers for each pool. I can specify that I want to utilize this node as much as possible. I can pick the type of pool, or I can say that I want to only use it for jobs that have a matching label. So I can specify it in my job definition, a certain label that this is a Windows job, and it'll be spun out to this pool. I can also specify, as usual, the number of executors I have. I can put some constraints on how I talk to it. Well, the first one is the number of executors. Then you have the shutdown timeout, only one build per VM. I know it's hard to see. And at the bottom, I can say that I want to launch these agents using SSH, and I can add my SSH keys.
clock.
It's good to know. Still frozen. Why am I frozen here? Just a second here. Okay. So I can do that for each of the pool sections. So here I'm doing the same for the Linux slaves, so I can have different executors on each one. Okay, so last thing I wanted to show you was in the job itself, there's one extra feature, and that is that I can borrow a VM to use in my build. So the idea is that, as I mentioned earlier, if you had a VM that you wanted to use to do some type of testing on that dirtied the file system, you can borrow I'm just bringing this message up here. What it's saying is that you're not going to perform your build on this VM, but this VM's for use as part of the job. So it gives you a way to get a Windows VM or a Linux VM, deploy your application on there, run your unit tests or whatever destructive type of thing you want to do on there, and then revert the snapshot and put it back in the pool. So it saves you the hassle of trying to configure and launch a cooperating VM. And the last thing I just wanted to show you was in vCloud Air, or in the vCloud definition, I can go out and look at each of these pools and see what my capacity utilization looks like. So I can make sure that from a pool perspective, I don't have more VMs running than I need to, that I'm paying the minimum amount that I can to get the build capacity on vCloud Air. Okay, that's the demo. Any more questions after all those earlier ones? Yes?
Is the plugin for VMware only available for Cloudbees, or is there like an open source, like free version as well? Does it depend if you're vCloud Air?
I think since it's not released yet, I'm not positive, but so the question is the plugin available open source, or is the plugin only available from Cloudbees? I'm not sure. When we do the release, I think the answer is that the plugin is written for enterprise, and so that it is available from Cloudbees. But I'm not 100% positive. We'll have to see when the announcement comes out. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Where do you get the permissions from in vCloud? Can you hook that up to existing permissions you have?
Yes. So in that very first screen where you configured the username, there was a URL for vCloud Air and then credentials. You can specify what credentials you have. What I didn't also show is you can have multiple cloud connections. So if you have, it's not unusual for an organization to have multiple VDCs in vCloud Air. So you may want to have more than one cloud definition and more than one set of credentials. So if you had different departments or you wanted to do billing by organization, then you would define more than one cloud API point and more than one set of credentials. So the answer to the question is, where do the credentials come from? They would come from an existing vCloud Air account. Thanks. Any other questions? Do you want to have a lottery to see when the Wi-Fi comes up again? You could do that. No? Yes, sir.
Can I just ask about CodeStream? How mature a product is it?
How much of a product is it?
How mature a product is it?
It's a 1.0 release right now. So the question is, how mature is CodeStream? It's a 1.0 release. And CodeStream presently runs on vSphere and can orchestrate pipelines across on-premise and vCloud Air. Later this year, we'll have a full service version that runs on vCloud Air. Thank you. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you. I'll give you time back to have more coffee and pastries. So, thanks for your time, guys.